Greetings, this is the first video on System of Logic series. Let's begin. The introduction. So John Stuart Mill starts off his introduction to logic by stating that before the commencement of a subject, a definition must be given. He does this because it's important that those involved in this in the discussion of a subject have a general idea of what it is that's being discussed, that they are both on the same page, so to speak. He goes on to say, though, that this definition must be provisional, meaning it must be subject to later revision as more is known about the subject. Due to the same language being used to express different ideas, there is a great variety of ways different authors have adopted of defining logic. Most authors have, in their treatment of logic, framed the definition to beg the question in favor of their particular beliefs on the subject. He states, "It is not to be expected that there should be agreement about the definition of anything until there is agreement about the thing itself." And we'll come back to that. He gives a definition. To define is to select from among all the properties of a thing those which shall be understood to be designated and declared by its name. So going back to there cannot be any agreement about the definition of a thing until there is agreement about the thing itself. He's saying that there must be agreement about the characteristics and attributes of a thing before we can agree which characteristics and attributes are best suited in the definition of that thing. And the properties must be well known to us before we are competent to determine which of them are fittest to be chosen for this purpose. Until we know the details, the characteristics and attributes of a thing, we cannot determine the most correct and compact way of restricting them being the characteristics and attributes, restricting them by a general description. So we must know the characteristics and attributes before we can correctly identify which ones best describe the thing that best fit the definition or best work for the definition. Is logic the art of reasoning? Definition of science: a systematically organized body of knowledge on a particular subject. Etymology is the study of the history of words. So etymology would be would show you the meaning of a word at its outset, and then how that meaning has changed over times. So it's the history of a word. What is known? So the etymology of science is what is known, knowledge of something acquired by study, its information. Art is defined as manner or mode, a lawful way that something is done. So logic being the science and art of reasoning, and originally Mills takes the definition that was used prior, that logic being the science of reasoning, and then he amends it, adding the art part. So logic being the science and art of reasoning could be restated as logic is the rules for conducting the mental process correctly, founded on the knowledge through the analysis of that process. An understanding of the mental process itself, what it depends on, and the steps it consists of is the only basis that a system of rules can be devised for the direction of that process. Logic comprises the science of reasoning as well as an art founded on that science. Reason is defined to infer an assertion from assertions already admitted. Or is logic the art and science of the pursuit of truth? The subsidiaries of logic, i.e. naming, classification, definition, and all other operations over which logic has jurisdiction, are contrivances there to enable a person to know the truths which are needful to him, and to know them at the moment in which they are needful. The sole object of logic is the guidance of one's own thoughts. Logic takes cognizance of our intellectual operations only as they help to bring about our own knowledge and to our command over that knowledge for our own purposes. Logic is concerned with inferences, not with intuitive truths. And there's a couple of different things here. Truths are either known directly or through the medium of other truths. Truths known directly are intuitive truths. Truths known through other truths are inductive truths. Intuitive truths are the premises through which all other truths are inferred. No knowledge could be arrived at by reasoning if nothing could be known prior to all reasoning. That if new units of knowledge are acquired through inferring through other pieces of knowledge, so if you would have to have prior pieces of knowledge to begin with. So somewhere you have to have a starting point, and that would be what we know through intuitive truths. Our own bodily sensations are one example of intuitive truths, i.e. our sense data, our five senses, our senses of sight, our sense of touch, our sense of taste, our sense of smell, and our sense of audio perception. Logic does not deal in intuitive truths. That would be the jurisdiction of metaphysics. The above mentioned sense data one receives cannot be questioned. We can mistake a rapidly inferred truth for an intuitive one, and Mills gives the example. Sight is one such example. What we perceive as distance may be felt to be intuitive when in reality it is a rapidly made calculation based on the size and color of an object. And the more experienced we are at perceiving distance, the more rapid the calculation and inference become. Metaphysics deals with what are and are not intuitive facts. Logic must be restricted to inferred truths, since it deals with reasoning or inference. Logic is not the science of belief. Logic is the science of proof. Logic provides the test for gathering whether or not the belief is well grounded. Relation of logic to the other sciences. Nearly all knowledge is inferred and therefore is answerable to logic. Logic is not the same as knowledge. Logic is the process by which we acquire valid knowledge. And it's what judges whether an inferred unit of knowledge is correct or not. Logic does not work to find evidence, but to determine whether it has been found. Logic judges. If there are any absolutely necessary relations between the facts that are required for proof, every science and individual are bound to conform to those relations under risk of making false inferences, on drawing conclusions which are not grounded in the reality of things. Whatever just knowledge we have that was not acquired through intuition depended on being in accord with the laws that is the province of logic to investigate. So whether or not we know the lawful way that we make correct inferences, whether or not we know that process, if we have made an inference that is founded in the reality of things, it followed those laws that it is the jurisdiction of logic to find. The utility of logic, how shown? If the science of logic does or can exist, it must be useful. Not much is needed to assent to the idea that if there are rules that every mind conforms to when it infers rightly, it is more likely for those rules to be followed if they are known. Definition of logic stated and illustrated. Logic is the science of the operations of the understanding which are subservient to the estimation of evidence. Logic includes the operations of naming, definition, and classification. Reasoning is inference. Logic comes into play whenever any knowledge is inferred from previous knowledge. So what Mills has done here is he has given us a provisional definition of what logic is and what it is not. And he has also defined the scope of his inquiry, and that he's interested in examining the intellectual processes of reasoning, and that his interest in logic as a science only goes so far as its necessity as an art. And so he's interested in logic for its practical ends and determining the processes that happen when we infer correctly, and then the rules guiding those processes. So that's been the introduction. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next chapter.